Hi, Nancy. So Nancy, you are an educator with Forest Today and Forever, and you're presenting Wood is Good.
The opening slide?
Yes, looks great.
Okay, great. Let's go ahead and get started. Excellent. I should let everyone know that I am presenting to you from Cresswell, and I am getting messages that say my bandwidth is low. I'm hoping this goes well, but I have passed my contact information on to Mary Beth, so if there's a problem, she can let me know. So let's go ahead and get started. So what is the forest sector? The term sector is a word we hear a lot when we're talking about jobs, but can be a little unclear as to what sector actually means. If I were to say to you, what are jobs in the healthcare sector? You'd probably say doctor, maybe a nurse, phlebotomist, the person who takes the blood. Those are all jobs that we know are in healthcare, right? Well, what about the people who run the cafeteria in hospitals? Are they part of the healthcare sector? Or are they part of the food sector? Or are they part of both? I think the answer is that they're part of both. The point being that the term sector is not hard and fast. There is overlap between jobs, but in general, a sector is a part of the economy where all of the jobs are interrelated. So I'm going to talk to you about the forest sector. So what are some jobs in the forest sector? When I ask this in classrooms, people usually say logger, that one comes to mind, or forester, and those are true, but it's more than that. Oregon's forest sector economy includes logging and forest management, and it also includes producing wood products such as lumber and plywood and paper, toilet paper, garden bark chips, and even wood-based energy. But it's even more than that. There's a term I want you to know. It's called value-added products. Have you ever heard that before? Most people haven't, but it actually means exactly what it sounds like. A value-added product simply means something has been changed in a way to make it more valuable. In front of you is a picture of two pieces of pine wood. They're both the same length, but clearly the one on the right is very different than the one on the left. The one on the right has been shaped. This would be used for molding for doors or windows. Even if these two pieces of wood are the same length, you are going to pay a lot more for the value-added one on the right than you will for the one on the left because it has been changed. So Oregon's forest sector economy also includes the manufacturing of value-added products like doors and flooring and window frames and furniture and cabinets and molding and engineered wood products, which I'll get more into a little bit later. So let's move on. Nearly half of the state of Oregon is forested. And isn't that wonderful that we live in a state with so many forests? In this picture, everything that is not light gray or dark gray is a kind of forest. So you can see most of the west side is forested and a large portion of the east side is forested. What you may not know is only a third of Oregon's forests are mostly managed for timber production. Those are our working forests. And when I say timber production, I mean the forests are managed primarily to be harvested and used to make wood products. So if a third of our land is used for timber production, what are we doing with the other 2/3? Well, one of them is held in reserve. And reserve means that it's being set aside for wildlife purposes, perhaps for recreational purposes, perhaps for protect water, and in some cases for cultural reasons, maybe important historic sites. The other is called multi-resource. Multi-resource means that it's used for lots of different purposes. Think about places in the forest where you know you can go snowmobiling and hiking and camping, hunting, and there is still some timber management that happens. It's just not primarily what happens there. Now, for today's presentation, we're going to focus on the working forest sector. That means I'm going to talk about jobs involved in the timber harvest side of forestry, and not so much about hydrologists or wildlife biologists or people who would be employed in multi-resources or the reserve forests. So let's go ahead and do that. So what are the jobs in the working forest sector? Well, the one we all know about is harvesting. So I like to start the presentation there, harvesting. We've harvested a site. We have our logs piled on a log deck in the forest. What happens to them next? We put them on a truck to transport them someplace else. Now, transporting is done via log truck driving. And log truck drivers are in very high demand right now but they're not really an early career job for people who want to be truck drivers, because driving these trucks in the woods is inherently a lot more dangerous and a lot more difficult than traditional highway driving. So most log truck drivers get there by first being highway drivers and then becoming log truck drivers. But log truck driving both pays very well and is a very satisfying job. So if being a truck driver is something you're interested in, you might want to consider this. All right, so we have our trucks with the logs. Where are they going? To manufacturing, of course, maybe to primary manufacturing to make stud lumber to make a building, or maybe to a secondary value-added product, but they go to the manufacturing facility next. Is that the end of the line? Well, of course not, because there's no point in making stuff if you don't get it to the people who want to buy it. So the last stage is sales and shipping. So there are people who specialize not only in the sale of all these products, but also how to get them to the people who bought them. Most manufacturing companies do not have their own fleet of trucks to drive them around. So there are people whose whole job is to determine how do we get the wood from our facility to the buyer, and it's shipped by rail, transported by trucks over the roads, and even in large container ships that will take them overseas. So those are the three ways we deliver. And a couple years back, I was in the middle of the city of Philadelphia, looking at a row house, like just a few feet from these skyscrapers. The row house was being remodeled, and all of the lumber came from Klamath Falls. So our wood goes across the United States and across the world. So that tells us what we do with the wood in the working forest sector. But there's the other part. What happens to the land after harvest? Well, Oregon law states that within 2 years of harvesting, the site must be reforested, meaning the trees replanted. So within 2 years of a harvest, the trees must be replanted so a new forest can grow. That is a whole world in and of itself. The people who grow the trees, plant the trees, manage those trees for the reforestation, that's the nursery workers. And that is an industry, a part of the industry that has many, many jobs. We're not going to get into detail there, but just so you know, growing the 40 million trees that are planted every year is very much a part of the working forest sector. So within 2 years of planting, after the trees have been planted, we have 4 years to make those trees what we call free to grow, which means they're tall enough and vigorous enough that they don't need much additional management to grow into a mature forest. So then we have still, though, some forest management that occurs. Much like if you've ever planted carrots in a garden, you plant a lot more carrots than the garden can actually comfortably produce. If you kept all those carrots, you'd have a bunch of tiny little, very thin, tall carrots and not the nice big ones. So part of our forest management is about 20 years into the trees being planted. Foresters go in and thin them out so that the largest, most vigorous trees can continue to grow, and they take out the ones that are small and struggling. And then we move back to harvesting. The whole cycle from harvest to reforestation to forest managed back to harvest on the west side is between 40 and 60 years. So that's the working forest sector in a nutshell. Why is this a great place to work, though? I'm going to get into that next. So the working forest sector is innovative, meaning that we are always finding new ways to make products that people need. What does that mean? Well, let's take a minute and talk about sawdust. It's very important that you understand that in the working forest sector, no part of the tree goes to waste. Everything is used. The picture on the upper left, that is an eye joist. The part that's kind of all weird and particulate-y in the middle, that is called oriented strand board. It's chipped wood that's glued together to make these beams that are then used to make the ceilings of homes or sometimes the floors. On the right side, in the upper right, that is particle board. Particle board is nothing more than sawdust that's been glued together. And what do we do with it? We make furniture out of it. Many inexpensive cabinets and dressers and many of the furniture you probably have in your own home is particle board, and that is made from the sawdust left over from making other products. So no part of the tree goes to waste. But we're doing something very interesting with sawdust these days, which many of you probably have never heard of before. Sawdust and waste wood can be used to make biofuel, a renewable energy and an alternative to fossil fuels. That's right, we can actually use sawdust to make gasoline. And this is not someday in the future, this is right now. There's a facility being built in southeastern Oregon to produce wood-based jet fuel for airplanes. It started production in 2021, and it should be fully operational by 2024. So this is happening right now. Other ways the forest sector is innovative. What do you notice about these two pictures? When I ask this in classrooms, people will say, there is a lot of wood in these pictures, and that is very true. And this is a very new technology that is making waves throughout the United States and the world. What am I talking about? Well, first you need to understand is historically how big your lumber was depended on the size of your log. So in this picture, you can see the middle piece called the heartwood. That would be the largest beam you could get out of a log. And then you have the dimensional lumber around the side, and then the curved part, which is called the residual wood. This is what we would chip up to make oriented strand board or turn into sawdust to make particle board, excuse me. So the piece of wood I have in front of my face right now would not have been particularly useful 50 years ago for dimensional lumber or heartwood because it's so small. What's changed is this. Thanks to engineered mass timber products, we can now build skyscrapers out of wood, 24-story buildings. How do we do that? It's because you can take smaller pieces of wood and glue them together using a very high-powered glue to create planks of basically any size that the mill can manage. So looking back at this picture, notice the beam on the left picture, notice its size. That's not from one single log. That's many logs that have been glued together. Notice the floorboard that the man is holding up above his head. Well, he's not holding it, he's just touching it. That is again made, it's a mass timber product, engineered wood product. He can make this, and we now have this entire floor made completely out of wood. Now, when I show this in classrooms, people will say, well, isn't there a problem with fire? Actually, these structures are as fire safe as their steel and concrete counterparts. And they're also as earthquake proof as their steel and concrete counterparts. So these are becoming the way cities around the world, let me say that differently. Cities around the world are now starting to turn to this mass timber products to make their buildings. Why? In part because this releases far less carbon dioxide. Concrete and steel produces the greenhouse gases that are causing global warming. Trees take in greenhouse gases. So this not only is a way we can produce structures, but we can do it in a way that reduces greenhouse gas emissions. Oregon is leading the way in mass timber production and construction in the United States. What else? The working forest sector is high tech. A lot of people don't really realize that, but computers, drones, and robots are everyday tools in the working forest sector. In this picture on the left is what we call a data logger. This is a handheld computer that people take in the woods to take data. Why do they use this and not a laptop or a cell phone? Because it rains in the woods, and when it's raining, those things would fall apart. So the data logger is used to collect data that is then uploaded into computers in the office and used to make maps like this. This is a geographic information systems map. Cora's degree in geography would probably know very much about this. The pink line around this image is the border of whatever the study area is. The green represents what satellites have declared to be forests. And then the yellow dots are the precise locations of where someone has done inventory or kind of study. So all of this data is collected using those computers, those handheld computers, and then uploaded to make these very sophisticated maps. The picture on the right is of a robot used in a mill. Mills use a lot of automation and robots. Why? Because in the field and at the mill, technology increases efficiency and lowers costs and reduces waste. All right. And then lastly, the working forest sector is sustainable. Wood is a renewable resource. Each year, 40 million trees are planted in Oregon's forests. 40 million trees, far more than are taken out. Excuse me. And in addition to producing timber, Oregon's working forests are also managed to protect fish, wildlife, soil, and water, just exactly like our forest reserves are, and just exactly like our multi-use forests are. And many industrial timber companies partner with watershed councils like Cora works with to do the kind of projects she talks about, to replace culverts for fish passages, to fish passage, excuse me, to put logs in the stream to provide habitat, to repair riparian areas. Watershed councils and forest companies work very closely to make our forests better for everyone. All right. The working forest sector is thriving and hiring. Oregon leads the nation in making wood building materials, and we always are looking for workers to keep up the pace. And these are good jobs. In 2017, Oregon's forest sector employment totaled over 61,000 jobs with an average annual wage of $54,200. And these were mostly jobs that include benefits, meaning you have health insurance, retirement packages, vacation pay, and sick pay. Good paying jobs. So let's take a look at what some of those jobs are. First of all, do you like working with machines? If you do, let's think about these jobs. Production worker or mill worker. Entry-level jobs include cleanup, stacker, loader, and small equipment operator. Aren't you excited about the idea of sweeping the floor all day? Most people say no, not really at all excited about sweeping the floor all day long. But here's the thing, if you have never worked in a mill before and you get a job there, they need to know, do you know how to work? Because take a moment and think about this. What are we all doing right now? We are sitting on our butts in front of a computer. If you take a job in a mill, you will be standing 8 to 10 hours a day. So your first job at a mill is going to make sure you are able to do that. But if you can, there's all sorts of ways to move up. One of those is through promotion. And all a promotion means is you get more money and more responsibility, usually to do a more difficult job. Through promotion, you can become a production equipment operator, running the big machines, or you can become the powerhouse operator. Remember when I told you that no part of the tree goes to waste? Some of that residual wood, the waste wood, like the sawdust, is used to actually power the mill. And there are jobs in the mill just to run that operation of producing the energy. So that's one way you can move up in the mill world. Another way is through apprentice. Now, an apprenticeship and an internship isn't exactly the same thing because sometimes internships are not paid, but apprenticeships are. Through apprenticing, there are many jobs you can move up into. 3 of them are, one is a mechanic. This is a mill mechanic. So this isn't just dealing with like trucks and cars. These are doing the large scale machines in the mill. Mill mechanicking is a specialty that you have to have quite a bit of training to be able to do. Another one is the millwright. Now, a millwright is a term that's very specific to mills. It's the person who maintains the mill machinery. Oftentimes, millwrights and mechanics have similar responsibility. Millwrights, however, have a bigger and broader scope over the mill, doing everything from installing new equipment to upgrading equipment to making changes to equipment. And then the last one is an industrial electrician. These are the people who are managing the robots and the automation. So it's a lot more than what your more typical house or home electrician would do. It's more than just putting in light fixtures. It's doing a lot more than that. So what are we looking at pay-wise? Production workers starting jobs tend to begin at $16 to $18 an hour. So that's above minimum wage. On the promotion side, you can be getting into jobs that pay $20 to $24 an hour or even more. And on the apprentice side, those jobs can pay $20 to $31 an hour, but an experienced millwright can make $150,000 to $170,000 a year. And I know a fellow who's an industrial electrician at a airport, and I think he's pulling $170,000 a year. These are very good jobs that you can get with no college education. So let's meet somebody who has one of these jobs. This is Tony C. Tony is the #2 planer lead operator for Roseboro in Springfield. She helps oversee the production of stud lumber, which is used to frame buildings. And her responsibilities include supervising workers to ensure that the mill operates safely and efficiently. And what she likes best about her job is finding better and faster ways to solve problems. She is currently in training to be a mill mechanic, and her ultimate goal is to be a millwright. Now, Tony came into Roseboro with no mill experience, and she started out sweeping the floors. How long do you think it took Tony to go from the floor sweeper to the #2 planer lead operator, which, by the way, she makes about $48,000 a year doing this? When I ask people this question, I usually hear 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 4 months. Tony went from floor sweeper to #2 planer lead operator in 4 months. And I like to tell people the reason that she was able to do that is she showed 3 characteristics that employers really love. In addition to not doing drugs, that is a given, don't do drugs. In addition to not doing drugs, they are, do you show up on time to work every day? Do you get along well with your peers? And can you take direction and correction from your supervisors? If you can do those 3 things, you're golden. And because of these characteristics, Tony moved up the ladder very fast. And when she's a millwright, she'll probably be making a 6-figure salary at some point. So, did Tony have a college education? Nope, Tony has a high school diploma. Do you think you would be good at Tony's job? Maybe give it some thought, because if you're interested in this kind of work, millwork is a place where you can move up the ladder very quickly if you're a hard worker. All right, do you want to work outside? A lot of people say, I want to work outside. If you do, let's consider these jobs. Forester, plants and grows trees and takes inventory. Taking inventory in the forest doesn't mean you go out and count every single tree. It means you go out and using math, you figure out how much wood is in your forest. It's an interesting process. Difference between a forester and a logger. Loggers are the ones who actually harvest the timber. Logging crews are always looking for new employees. The starting job is a choker setter, like you see in this picture, people who wrap the cables around the logs so they can get drug up the hill, and those logs can be put on the deck waiting to be transported. Another one is a forestry technician. These are the people who help with forestry operations. So technically, a person who works in the nursery picture I showed you earlier is a type of forestry technician. And then forest engineer. This is a job many people have never heard of before. Forest engineers design the forest roads, bridges, and other infrastructure needed to make sure that transporting the logs out of the forest can be done safely with minimal damage to the environment. So if you like to work outside, these are some jobs to consider. And let's take a look at somebody who's doing it right now. This is Ben P. He grew up in LC, and he knew he always wanted to work outside. And he is the Harvest Operations Administration Forester for Seneca Jones Timber. He spends most of his day working outside in the wood, like 80% of his time. And he makes sure that harvest operations are done on schedule and meeting his company's management goals. And he very much enjoys helping his forestry coworkers as needed, doing everything from planting trees to fighting fires. Now, do you think does Ben's job require a college education? You may be surprised to learn that actually no. Ben has a college education. His position required either a college education or experience working a harvest operation. So if a person had been a logger, they could have applied for his job and been a successful candidate. In Ben's case, he had a degree in forestry from Oregon State University. So what are some of the other characteristics you need to have to do a job like Ben's? Well, first of all, you got to be able to get up early because Ben works logging hours. He is on site at dawn. Most loggers and foresters are. So if you genuinely want to work outside, you got to be able to get out of bed really early. You also got to be able to know how to read a map because your phone is not always going to be able to get you to where you're trying to go. You got to be able to read a map and navigate those logging roads. So those are some things to think about if you're interested in being a forester. Mary Beth, do we have time to do one more or should I end it here for questions?
I think we should end it here for questions.
Excellent, because I had one other person to talk about, but that's okay. Let's just stop here. Do you all have any questions about, I'll just scroll to the next one, sorry. Here we go. Do you have any questions about working in the forest sector? I am available right now.
Okay, so what is the pay like for a forester? I know you
Yeah, I can tell you that video right here. Yes, so foresters usually make between $50,000 and $75,000. That's kind of the early career salary that can go up as you move up the ladder.
Okay, as an entry-level person just starting that job, would that be the wage? Or is that something more like?
You'd be looking at, for a beginner, probably looking at about 40 to 50 starting salary as a forester. Forest engineers make more.
Okay.
I would say probably starting about 60,000 for a forest engineer.
All
Which
right.
does require a college degree, right?
Absolutely. Forest engineering not only requires a college education, it often requires a master's in forest engineering, but not always. That is a very math heavy job. You are basically an engineer specializing in forest environments.
Do we have any other questions that you can throw into the chat, please?
I want to say just how appreciative I am of you covering sort of the variety. I mean, it's a real wide spectrum of jobs in the forest sector. And I want to say something else too.
Oh.
You know, we're kind of an environmental science program, but you know, I really appreciate that you point out how wood products are renewable and there's new energy around their being part of the solution for climate change. So I really appreciate that you brought that up too.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'm just going to go back a moment just to show you that the other element of this is forestry is a business, and some people want an office job. And if you're interested in working in a business office, these are jobs for you. I mean, there are 3 major legs to the forest sector: in the woods, in the mill, and then running the business. So there's many, many opportunities, and they are hiring now people who have. There are jobs right now for high school, community college, and 4-year college graduates. Many community colleges offer certification programs, associate degrees, and technical degrees that can help you start in the working forest sector. And then Oregon State University and some community colleges offer degrees in forestry. So there are ways from your own community you can enter this field if that's interesting to you.
Hey, Mary Beth,
Here-
I got one question directly messaged to me.
Sure.
How could you use a forest ecology degree in this industry? So if you were interested in kind of the forest ecology.
That's a very good question. Now, part of that depends on the size of the company. So some very large companies, such as Weyerhaeuser, will have study sites in which they use forest ecologists, wildlife biologists, and fisheries specialists to study what's going on. And then the picture I showed you of the nursery, there are nurseries that specialize in forest genetics, because we have a problem throughout the United States where it's forestry or agriculture of invasive species. So the geneticists and forest ecologists will work together to find how can we perhaps improve a tree species so as to battle things like the port orchid. There's a fungus that's killing our native port orchid trees here in Oregon, and there's effort being made by these forest ecologists and geneticists to see if we can figure out a way to combat that, because port orchid cedar is not only a valuable tree, but it's a beautiful tree, and it's dying in droves because of this fungus. And so there are many roles for those people as well. If you're interested in forest health, there are positions within the working forest sector. They tend to be in larger companies. However, they are also available through the federal government, the Bureau of Land Management, the U.S. Forest Service, the National Park Service.
Great. Great information, Nancy. I've got a couple of questions. Two or more specific. What is the waste output of sawdust? Which I'm not quite
That's a
sure
very
what
interesting
that
question.
means.
You know, see, the thing is that any sawdust that is not, for whatever reason, able to be used to make particle board, all of that is gathered up and sent over to the powerhouse. And eventually it's just used as wood-based energy to create the power for the mill. So really there is no waste.
Okay. And then,
but if that's not exactly what the person's asking, you can also send me an email and I'll try to get more specific information.
okay. What degrees do you recommend for field jobs? Oh, this field of jobs. So I think.
Oh, well, I guess someone told me that no matter what part of the forest sector you want to go into, like let's say you wanted to, I know a woman who works as a human resource person, meaning that she helps with the benefit packages and the paperwork for new employees. She took a couple forestry classes when she was in college just to have that background. But it's an interesting question because people have come into the forest sector from lots of different angles. And so there is no really one pathway. I do very much agree with what Cora said, though. If you go online and you look at jobs and you think, hey, that one sounds really interesting, do look at the qualifications for that. That can really help you identify where you want to go to find the career that would make you happy.
So I've got a couple, I was wondering on the, me personally, was wondering on the mass wood products, are those made in a sawmill or are they made somewhere else?
It's a good question. So typically what happens is you have a mill, all they create is mass timber products. So they buy the lumber, just like a 2x4, they bring those into another mill that then has the ability to lay them out in rows of, I think it's like 60 by 20 feet. At least that's one that I saw, where they then put the lumber, like stack it like this and then like this, and glue it together to make those pieces. What's interesting though is that when you're building a mass timber structure, what will happen is the architects and engineers send to the mills basically what the kit should look like. Every piece exactly laid out in size and width. So then it's brought on site and then essentially assembled as a kit. So they're not creating them. It's not like with concrete and steel where it's poured and built on site. It's essentially moved in and then assembled from this pre-made kit, if that makes sense. Let me go back to that picture and see if I can show you. Escape. So notice on this picture here, see if I can find it. Here. Okay. So do you notice in this picture how the hole is already in this board on the left? It came to them looking like that as part of the kit, where that little hole on the left would slide into the beam below it, and they just build it right there on site to secure it together. It's like a model kit when we used to make model airplanes. It's all there, you just have to stick it together. Which also cuts back on carbon dioxide emissions, because there is really only the transport from the mill to the site, and then after that, they don't need a lot of equipment to put these together. There's certainly some, but not like when you have a steel and concrete building.
Couple
Did that answer
of
your question,
more,
Mary Beth?
yes, it does. Thank you so much. So couple of more questions related to the ecology. So one is, and I don't know if this is in your area of expertise or not, but a student cited that there is a Christmas tree farm that's being cleared to be turned into housing. So it's more like a zoning question and how those things happen,
Yeah.
I think.
So zoning is not entirely in my field, but my husband and I own 151 acres of timberland in the Days Creek area, which is outside of Canyonville. So I know a little bit about this. It kind of depends on whether, like, our property is zoned farm forest, which means it can only be used for forestry. But what can happen is, let's say you are, okay, so with the tree farm is not, when you're growing Christmas trees, it's not really considered a forest. So they probably, when they cleared those trees, were able to then put in to get that land reassessed for a different use, and then they can use it to build houses. Again, I'm sorry that I can't be more detailed. I know a little bit about this world, but I don't know a ton about this world. In some areas, it's very different. Some counties make it very difficult to convert forests into housing. Other areas, depending on the growth of the cities, it's made easier to do. Did that answer the question?
I think so, yeah. If not, the student can ask or clarify what they wanted to know. The other question,
Please just send me an email
Okay. Another question is in regarding to, cutting down a large amount of trees. Isn't that bad for the environment?
Oh, that's a very good question because I get this one a lot. First thing you need, so when people will ask me, why do we clear cut forests? Well, there's two reasons. One is it is simply more efficient to go in and take out all of the trees versus taking out individuals. But the other part, and I'm going to share this. Well, I was going to tell you a short story about it, but I see we're kind of low on time, so I'll be more efficient. Where you mostly see the clear cuts is on stands of Douglas fir forests. And Douglas fir is a tree that is shade intolerant. It needs full sunlight in order to grow. So this is a tree species that evolved prior to Euro-American settlement. This was a tree species that naturally, first of all, it naturally grows in homogeneous stands, meaning a stand of Douglas fir is going to be mostly just Douglas fir. And they tend to be mostly just Douglas fir, all about the same age. And the reason is that these seeds would come in after a major disturbance, a fire, a landslide, whatever. The seeds come in and the trees all grow. Now, if they're growing underneath the cover of a different kind of tree, the Douglas fir don't do very well. So the reason we clear cut Douglas fir is that's what those trees need to do well. They need to have large open areas of mostly mineral soil in order to grow. So it's a good question in terms of, isn't it bad for the environment if you were growing, let's say, hemlock? Well, yes, because hemlock can't grow in that way. Hemlock does not like full sun. It has to grow underneath the understory of another tree. So you can individually pull out hemlock. But with Douglas fir, if you tried to do it that way, the trees would not do well. And Douglas fir is our primary timber producing tree because it is very, very strong it's very strong for its weight, meaning it's light yet strong. So think about walnut is a very strong wood, but it's very heavy. You really couldn't build a structure out of walnut that would collapse under its own weight. Douglas fir is very light and very strong. So it's the primary tree that we grow for timber production. Doesn't mean it's the only thing we grow. Most foresters, when they plant a forest, there are areas where Douglas fir aren't going to do well. You'll do cedar or ponderosa pine or a different kind of species. But the reason we clear cut Douglas fir is that's what the tree needs to do well.
Thank you. So we need to wrap
You're
this
welcome.
up. And I really appreciate your time and the abundance of information about the forest sector jobs. I learned a lot, and I hope the
you are
students
most
did.
welcome.
Pardon me?
Sorry, I should have interrupted. I forget our connection is weird. Thank you so much. I was very happy to be here today.
Great. Thank you too, Nancy. That's all we have. I think that students will need to check back in with Helen. Is that correct, Helen?